people that are able to attain things at the highest level have a different set of habits, mindsets, and practices and decisions than other people. But those capacities are available to each one of us. When we talk about these things, it triggers the inner knowing. It triggers the inner knowing that we are capable of more. It triggers the inner knowing that our choices are perhaps holding us back. And that can create a sense of remorse. Like right now, in real time, I'm experiencing a sense of remorse and frustration at my own decisions. Now, in one way, that's useful because we don't tend to make change into our lives until something becomes painful. As Bob Marley once sang, "No woman, no cry." In today's episode, we sing, "No health, no wealth." Today, we're going to be examining the link between our own well-being, our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, our mental health, when it comes to our decision-making, and specifically with the context of our financial decision-making. We'll be looking at everything from information overload, the madness of the world, and our own daily health habits. And this conversation, in part, has been stimulated by the fact that, Sam and I work very closely together on this podcast and with our other projects. And I've been burning the candle at both ends. I've been over-caffeinating, over-stimulating just to get everything done in preparation for our big Camp Out event, which Sam, by the way, quick plug, is going to be speaking at. So if you haven't got a ticket yet, go to campout.live, come and meet Sam in person and hear his talk on the financial reset. Anyway, back to the subject. So we decided actually it's such an important subject, and it's one that we've only really scratched the surface on in passing within our previous conversations. But our physical well-being can really directly impact our financial well-being. So we're going to look at these links today, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's the simple moniker that everyone's heard of, that, health, wealth is health, really. Have I got it the right way around? Just a good moniker, wealth is health.
Yes.
But, that's really what you want. And it's so critical to look at, especially with the clown world and the madness across everything this past few years that a lot of people have been immersed in learning about, researching, navigating through. And it's so important that we find that balance because, when we talk about building, even in terms of practical financial wealth, we're doing that for better well-being. Let's talk about the end goal is not to have, lots of numbers on a screen or piece of paper or whatever format or, sitting on some gold. What's the real wealth is your well-being, being able to support others in their well-being. We talk about that, looking to support projects, whether it's, growing projects or homeschool, anything that's creative, that's where the wealth is actually used productively, and it is about free time and being sharing and all those elements. So there's no point also that finding that balance of striving for a certain area and actually ending up screwed yourself and not able to enjoy the fruits of that labor or to be present to do it. And I think we've all experienced our lives. I know certainly in the sort of height of my busyness, in my kind of former life in the Alps, when I was busy running bars and the travel company on the side, whatever, I realized at points down my personal relationships were suffering. I was getting out of balance, and we always have to look at it and always come back into. And so, particularly with all the narratives going on today that can be massively overwhelming, and a lot of people I meet are understandably mentally burnt out from taking so much info in the last 3 years, that I think it's really important just to look at it. And we always talk about coming back to ourselves and getting grounded. So I'm really excited just to have a discussion about that because it's crucial. It's the foundation of everything.
Yeah, it is crucial. And actually, as we come into, I confess, coming into this episode, I can feel the tension in my body today. The old adage of disease is a lack of ease in the body. And right now, I feel the tension of overworking, mental overload, physical overload, emotional overload. It's my body, subtly in this case, it's not screaming at me yet, but it's saying, pay attention because you're not taking care of yourself. And that's key. And last weekend, I had to have a word with myself because it got to the weekend and I'd been working so hard. I'd become really stressed out by a few things that were happening within the projects I was working on, that I started to lose actually the enjoyment of what I was doing. And you start to question, what's the point in doing all of this if I'm not enjoying it? And I had to come back to myself, as you mentioned, come back to the big picture in terms of the change that I want to see in the world and the difference we want to make and the driving force and motivation. And it was really going back to that motivation that made me realize how important it is that I take better care of myself. And, from my mindset to my daily choices. So I'm really pleased we could have this conversation today. But you're also right in the context of the madness of the world. Our last episode, Sam, was about money printing madness. We looked at the chaotic levels of money printed in the last few years in response to COVID, literally in some cases trillions of dollars, which ultimately taxpayers are going to pay for, by the way. As we discussed in the last one, maybe it'll never be repaid, but that's a different issue. So we're dealing not only with just the madness of how the world operates, but all of the information overload for those of us who have been activated in the last couple of years about what's going on, trying to make sense of why these things are happening and how the things are happening, trying to understand the power structures and how they operate, what's real, what's not real. There's the moment you peer beyond the veil, it's destabilizing because things that you hold dear and trust and believe in the past become disrupted. It leaves us, potentially losing our footing, losing trust not only in the wider world, but trust in others and trust in ourselves. And it's radically destabilizing. So we do need to be able to come back to ourselves and find that centered ground. And then, I talked about the big projects. We're all living increasingly busier lives. There's increasing complexity, and it takes us away from ourselves. So all of these competing forces can be damaging for our health.
Yeah, totally. And getting grounded again, Dan. And it's almost like, and it's reflected in the markets. It's reflected in the charts. We see these boom bust cycles, almost being overheated or then overcooked and, down those lows. And it's really trying to find that line, that consistency in the middle. And when you've got that consistent grounding, then you can react better to both of those, highs and lows in the cycle. So as we've talked about, cycles are always playing out. Even if you've got a good lifestyle going with all the different effects, outside world, maybe even, astrology playing out for you or interpersonal relationships, it's never going to be a smooth road in that sense. But if you can find that middle part in it in yourself, then you're going to be much better at navigating through them. So, and that goes same with the financial markets, that rather than being, where people fall victim to the kind of market cycles is they get overexcited at the tops and over fearful at the bottom. Whereas if you can stay consistent, then you just react to where it is in a kind of, and I don't mean this in a cold, detached way, but in a way that you're grounded in your reality and you're not pulled around, by what's going on and getting sucked into groupthink, and again, the sort of, that's very powerful to get sucked in emotion, as we touched on the last episode. Also, when you realize that those who control the narratives, the story, that spikes emotions a lot. So that, if you're getting caught up in that as well as your own emotions, you'll be led that, then that's where you become much more led into your actions, and your actions can be out of fear or overexcitement rather from a grounded place. And we always know we make best decisions from a clear, grounded space. And I think the other thing that's really important to recognize is that I've talked a lot about it, this kind of emotional roller coaster that exists in our world. And I'd argue that the powers that be absolutely project that on purpose, because it spikes people's emotions and it gets them out, and it keeps them in a fight or flight mode, Dan. And I remember on my sort of long-term health journey being really interested in Bruce Lipton's work.
Oh, yes.
Amazing books, Biology of Belief. And one of the really interesting points he talked about, which really resonated with me and made a lot of sense, was, from his studying the animal kingdom, when an animal is got an absolute direct threat to its life, the old idea of a deer being chased by a lion, then actually it's in fight or flight, but it needs to be, because it needs to just run as fast as it can to save its life. And in doing that, it actually turns off its immune system, its overall immune system shuts down. So you conserve that energy because it's moved into the emergency energy of just running. So that's why they get incredible bursts of speed, and they're able to do that. And then when they've got free of that, then they go back into a calm. But what the whole, particularly the media cycle and the way we've been spiked for years with the kind of roller coaster and the fear porn and the, all that kind of stuff. And we see it constantly around every news thing, that extremity, because it sells, and also it has, it has that effect of burning us out, and it puts us in that fight flight. So potentially a lot of us, particularly in very media-led Western worlds, if we're consuming media, we are in a fight flight sort of modality 24/7 to some extent. Yeah. And that's leading to ill health. Of course it is, because at some level, even though there is no actually direct threat, that's the kind of mode we've been put into in our kind of, in our brain state. So that does reflect on our overall health, and it can't not do, Dan. And that example from Bruce Lipton really put it into perspective for me, that actually we're in that way, and that's why actually our immune system is sometimes not functioning as highly as it should do, and why we're more susceptible to getting ill. So it's really important to find that balance line, and what that really does is burn out our adrenals. Our adrenal being the master gland, and the adrenals are so key. And then we get sucked into coping mechanisms, like we've all lived it, and you've lived it the last few weeks, Dan, is the coffees. And it works, because what a coffee really does is kickstart exhausted adrenals.
Yep.
But again, you're back in that roller coaster of stimulants, and then maybe using a relaxant, so we need to then come down again. Alcohol's a classic one for that, but you're on that roller coaster again, and it's not sustainable. And in fact, by constantly kickstarting one's adrenals, we're just wearing them out.
Yes.
And we become dependent, and I'm sure we've all experienced this. People have been on the coffee road, and I know that when I kicked the habit years ago, when I was living in warmer climates, and we weren't in such an intense psyop, Dan, and it felt like easier times. It was, the psyops are still there on the surface. I felt so much calmer, and the coffees got back into my life back here in the UK winter and through challenging times. But I know recently I've started kicking them again, and the difference is incredible, because it just you get you more on that flat thing, and the more you have it, the more you need it, and it's that cycle. So coming back into yourself and trying to get grounded, so you can navigate sort of on a more grounded level, because we've always said this: you're not going to stop the news cycles or the manipulation going on out there, but what can you control? Almost the only thing any of us control is our own well-being, our own groundedness. And if we can look at that and not negate that, and not take that out of the equation, it's critical, because it's almost like the whole world can feel completely different when you're feeling on good form.
Yes,
the same definitely. World situation.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Often we don't see the world as it is; we see it how we are.
Yes, wow, that's true,
and that's huge. It's a huge shift. So it means you can relate things differently. I've seen it myself. As people know, after a good night's sleep, the whole world can seem a different place, even if nothing's actually practically changed. It's because you've got overtired. So there's so much to it, and it's so important, because I also see, if you're especially looking to, support people and help people, whatever, if you're burnt out yourself, then you're actually sabotaging your ability to help people. And so trying to keep on that even keel and remember self-nurture and listen to your body is absolutely key. And I suppose I always bring in that I have a longer view of things, Dan, that it's about consistent action over time, rather than just absolutely going hell for leather, burning oneself out and then not knowing what to do. I think consistency of action over time is a much more sustainable route for us to get empowered and make change, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, it's starting to sound like a personal lecture that I need to hear. But it is true. It is true.
Well, we all need to hear it, Dan.
We do need to hear it. Yeah.
And when you have the discussions, it's like I always said, when we have the discussions, or whether it's with you or anybody else, it's for me, it's for ourselves, isn't it? To get in that energy and talk about it. That's why it's good to talk about it.
Yes.
To just because I think that's part of the human condition, is endlessly forgetting. Perhaps that's why the very human condition is that we don't get it nailed, and we know that we keep forgetting. We have to keep reminding ourselves, and we keep drifting off course. And we have to keep bringing ourselves back to center. And I think that's the dance that we're doing.
That is the dance. I mean, I've been through extensive periods over the last decade where I've had times with no alcohol, no caffeine, where I've been very selective about what I eat. In fact, times so disciplined that perhaps that was unhealthy and being so restrictive. But quite frankly, during those times, I was healthier. My mental sharpness was clearer. My own inner sense of fear, because self-doubt, one that experiences, particularly when you're starting things out in business and doing things for yourself, self-doubt can be paralyzing. But during those times of mental clarity, I mean, as we're talking, I'm almost like wishing that for myself right now, because what I need right now for the projects I'm taking on is that level of mental clarity, the emotional stability, because it does become an emotional roller coaster. I mean, even just before, I am literally drinking half caffeinated, half decaf. I'm weaning myself off. But that, I mean, as I said out loud, I'm like, you sound like an addict. Like, it's crazy. Like, but in some ways, we're all addicted.
Well, Dan, that was my big wake up call when I went on my kind of raw food journey. And, you know, I would argue I wasn't, I wasn't a really bad eater. I ate pretty healthily. But again, it made me realize we are all addicts. We are all, you know, even a lot of people lead a healthy life or whatever, we're all addicts. And when you really cut out all the stimulants and those things that, you know, you find comforting, even the little ones, you realize how much a slave to them you are until you give them up. It's very easy to say, no, I don't actually need them. I have it in moderation. Well, try giving them up. Try getting on a kind of raw food, just clean living foods diet, and see where you're at. Because until you've done it, it's really hard to judge. And I felt that, you know, and I've experienced that, Dan, when I felt really amazing. I felt free of that kind of, I felt freer person, but I had to go through the cold turkey. You know, and I'm glad you said that, you know, you were sort of tapering down slightly, because absolutely, you know, it happened to me, Dan. I felt burnt out a couple of months ago. You know, I had a few trips away, but even still felt quite burnt out. And now I'm starting to feel the energy come back by stopping all those stimulants. Yes. But when you do stop a coffee, if you're on coffees every day, if you do stop them, you know, I know this happened to me, and I've spent a lot of friends who've done this, you know, the most insane headaches and withdrawal symptoms.
Yes.
Well, that's showing you how addictive and how powerful this substance is. And again, that's not to badmouth coffee at all, but it's got out of balance, because these things are powerful, you know, herbal stimulants, powerful things in nature. They're incredible tools. But look what they've become in our society. They've become a daily, you know, standardized thing, and become not just 1 cup a day. We can move into 2 cups, 3 cups. So what was something that maybe was much more ritualized as that's a really strong, you know, powerful, plant, you know, product that can use for stimulant. You might really need it for a boost and use it. We're now relying on it. It's become the norm.
Yes.
So that again is the out of balance with nature.
Yes, exactly. You know? And essentially, we need to distill it down to that as a plant-based drug. You know, or potentially you could classify it as a nootropic.
Yes,
it can have very practical benefits, totally. But when it's used intentionally and consciously rather than habitually, because, you know, if you were taking like microdosing or just like hitting the psychedelics every single day and became a habit, then it's no longer the intentional journey that you started with. And it's the same with coffee. Like, I know full well my coffee is a habit now, and I know that you can start to justify it to yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I did. That's how I originally. I tried to avoid coming off coffee by learning about the scientific benefits of caffeine. Yeah. I said, well, you know, but I negated the point of habit versus intentional use, because there is lots of evidence that it can inspire creativity. But if I'm not working on creative tasks or specific creative projects where I'm thinking this could be a useful tool in this moment, and I'm just having it as a morning coffee and starting to lie to myself by saying, oh, but you've got creative work to do all day, then it's just a false justification.
Because look at your baseline, Dan. If you're coming from a baseline of you feel amazing, energized, and I want to have that on top to see what that can do for me, but that's not the reality. Let's be honest. The reality is,
it's not reality.
You are. But I'm trying to be honest for all of us. And if you're in that camp and you've done that, amazing. But let's really be honest. You know, 99% of the society are drink it because they feel sluggish, and it works. It absolutely works. You know, as often, you know, in terms of relaxation, the alcohol works at a certain level. But once you've gone beyond intentionally, and I'm so glad you brought it up, Dan, it's your relationship with it. You don't have to go to puritanical, I must never do any of that. But you look at your attention and how consciously you're doing it. You know, I find, you know, it's a completely different ball game when you do anything consciously and intentionally rather than unconsciously. So again, you're the driver, rather than just you're a zombie going, I need a coffee just to function and pick me up. So you're absolutely right. It can be used as a tool, but actually it's become a crutch.
It does. And the other piece around justification, and there's another thread I'd like to explore here as well. But, you know, as I was thinking about the next 2 weeks, so, you know, we talked about camp out at the beginning. There's 2 weeks to at the point of recording this. This time in 2 weeks' time will be. In fact, we will be. No, yours is on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
But at the time of recording this, we'll be in 2 weeks' time. We're at the event, having a great time, hopefully. But as we spoke about this in preparation for this episode, I said, well, after camp out, I will do this. And it's always when this happens, I will. And as I caught myself saying that to you, and I reflected on afterwards, the justification I gave myself is I can't deal with that crash right now, the headaches and the withdrawal that will come with it. But actually, what I really need is to be on top form for the next 2 weeks of preparation. And I need to be on top form at the event when it all comes together. So actually, I need to go through temporary suffering in order to get on top form. And I'm going to make the decision to do that because there's always another time. It's about, as Tony Robbins says, turning our shoulds into musts. I should quit this or I should reduce that. No, I must do this. I must do this because if I am going to have a better run into this event, then it really does mean eliminating these habits. And if it means that actually there is an intentional use case over that time, great, take the opportunity, but don't become habitually reliant on it. Now, the other thing I want to touch on this about the habitual nature of it, Sam, is actually, I do think there is a tipping point from intentional use to habitual use. And within that tipping point is usually a deeper factor that we're avoiding. And when it becomes so habitual, we lose track of what that trigger point was. So as I'm speaking this, I know that it's become a crutch, but it's also masking something else. What that is, maybe we'll unfold it during this, but there is something I'm avoiding, which I'm therefore plowing into these unhealthy habits, which are distractions from what needs to be addressed.
100% Dan, and I experienced it really viscerally. I think I talked about it on our pilot episode when I did my kind of raw food, living food journey where I spent 6 months, and I did go hardcore because I wanted to give up stuff and see where it took me. So I was very disciplined around it. But what was really interesting, it got me off the boom bust cycle, which is stimulant and then relaxant. Okay, this kind of feeling of stimulating with the morning coffee and sedating with heavy foods. And a lot of cooked, it's another big rabbit hole, but cooked food and the difference. But cooked food generally gives you that sedation. And obviously we want that sedation because we're overstimulated. So it works. And people talk about food coma, that kind of feeling of, actually people like, and it's not a healthy feeling because you're actually feeling tired, but because you're so stimulated, you enjoy that because it's brought you down.
Yeah.
Now, what was really interesting, Dan, and it ties into what you said there about the escapism, I felt amazing. But I felt I wasn't used to just feeling this constant kind of level of awake awareness. And there was some discomfort in that because it wasn't what I was used to, because I wasn't sedated.
Yes.
And so as much as you go, actually, I was more alive, I was brighter, I was more alert. I'd never, in my adult life, I was actually refinding how we were when we were children, much more childlike, where, hadn't got built up as much toxicity and stuff in my life. And, body was working really well in those younger years. That kind of awakeness, and then you go to sleep, you wake up, you feel great again. You haven't got the stresses of obviously adult life. But what was so interesting was, even though I felt much better, it was challenging because there wasn't this feeling of just kind of, sedation. I'm almost trying to show you how it was, but it was like, sit down, zone. It was a zoning out, Dan.
Yeah.
So I had no zone out place.
Yes.
But of course, over time, you get more used to it. It's amazing because it was more creative and it was more alive. But definitely feel that I'm so not used to that. Our norms have become so, in our society, our norms of health and well-being have become so low level that what people think is health, and I experience it, they've never actually realized what vibrant health feels like. And it's so different. It's a complete another world, and I felt like you said there, I could read kind of esoteric texts I was interested in or real higher minded thinking books or listen to things that when I was really pure and a lot of times when I was doing some of the fasting that I can't read now, and that's what's interesting. It was the same person, same background, same education, but actually I was able to compute and kind of felt like I was, interacting with the world around me in a different way because I was cleaner and clearer. And that's why people talk about fasting is, clearing the pathways to higher. A lot of people talk about, clearing fasting is about connecting with God, whatever words you want to use, but higher self or, cosmic conscious, whatever words, resonate with you and in your, in your life. But definitely I experienced that just from being clean and not being on these stimulants and these sedatives. Yes. So you're absolutely right. It is obviously the most, I'd argue that food addiction or the coffee addiction is the most accepted addiction in our society, and it's normalized.
Yeah.
When I was out of that, it was a different world, and I realized it was very interesting. Even when I was living, you walk through a town, I realized that we were all just often thinking about what's the next hit. You know, me and my friend at the time we used to talk about, it's a hit. Everything's a hit. I'm going to go for
Yes.
coffee. I'm going to go and grab a sandwich. And I'm not saying you need to get that pure level, but just noticing that was huge. That how much of the next excitement in food was a driver in our lives. And when I felt clear of that, I felt like, oh my God, I've got time for creation. Food had a lesser role, or coffees, or all of it, Dan.
Yes.
And you could see how a trap that was. And I'm not preaching a purist line or anything. It was just really interesting to see that. I didn't think I was a victim of being addicted to all these things, but I kind of viewed that actually, and I started to almost all of us are without knowing, and it was a huge shift. And just talking about it, again for me, because I've not been on those heights, and I'm not saying that was sustainable because I was living in a very warm climate, outdoors a lot, but it was so amazing that it motivates me just by talking about it. It motivates me to get more towards that again.
Yes.
Because I've self-justified the coffees all winter. Need to get on, and I have been busy, and it has helped me, but it's at a cost.
Yes.
And I need to bring that into balance.
Well, interesting as you're speaking, because I have experienced that kind of purer sense of being and exactly what you're talking about. And I was like, that's actually, the illusion that coffee is going to get me towards greater productivity for the next 2 weeks of preparation. Yeah. I actually need the state that you just described because I've experienced it. I know. The problem is, it's like when our hair grows. Like, if I was to attempt to grow a beard of your length, I wouldn't know. And I need it because I cut myself shaving this morning because of my busyness, trying to do everything in a hurry. Look what happens when we become less effective.
There you go. Creates more time in the day, Dan. I haven't got to shave.
But we don't notice day to day how our beard is growing. We don't notice the length of our hair grow. And the same is true when our health gradually deteriorates because of our choices. It's not instantaneous.
No.
It's like bad health is an accumulation of decisions made or subconsciously, unconsciously, or consciously every single day.
Yeah.
So we won't necessarily notice the shift because when I had that more pure sense of living, it's light and dark, isn't it? It's like it takes the contrast to notice it, but it doesn't happen immediately. You don't have a sudden shift. You might do actually when you like you said, if I suddenly withdraw the coffee, I will notice the sudden shift.
You'll feel the pain. You'll feel the pain of what you've been doing,
And if you've eaten a purer diet for a long time, if you suddenly have, go and get fast food or something, you'll get the dopamine spike, and then you'll also get a deeper crash because your body is like dealing with it. But it might clean it up quicker because your body is.
But you feel the difference is, Dan, you'll feel the pain of things that you're actually got so used to not feeling the pain of because. I mean, this gets deep into the whole way the body works, whatever. But actually, until you've cleaned yourself up, then you realise what certain things are doing to you. Once you're consuming that all the time, the body almost stops rejecting poisons because it realises you're not going to stop doing it, and it protects you with mucus layers, and you're getting all that kind of stuff. Once you've cleaned it out, and that's what happens. So I won't go too much on this raw food danger, but if you brought up a child. With a sort of pure raw food, clean. I'm just talking about clean fruits and veg, organic, amazing produce, or even meat. I'm not getting caught in that. Even just pure, clean food, really pure. And then that child goes to its first birthday party with friends, who have been eating a more standard, Western diet, standard American diet. SAD, is the acronym for a reason. If they then have a slice of cake. Even though they're super healthy, whatever, they will react super badly to it.
Yeah.
Because the first time you take, some toxins in your body, you feel awful. So I always give example, Dan, a lot of these things, and coffee's a great example. Did you enjoy your first coffee?
No.
Probably not. No. Did you enjoy your first beer even? It didn't taste right. You had to get into it.
Yes, that's
right.
It
wasn't natural. You had to almost get a taste for these poisons in your body early on. Your first big drink session, your body went, get this out of me. You might have puked up,
purging situation,
purge it, whatever, and then you keep doing it, and you keep sort of acclimatizing. Your body's realizing, okay, he's not going to stop. I better try and pack it away, protect myself. So you build up this level of acceptable toxicity you're putting in. When you get clean again, and you have to sort of undo that work, and like you said, it's not an overnight. You've got to go through, the caffeine withdrawal. You've got to remove a lot of that stuff that you've built up. But actually, when you're clean, you then start to feel the real effect. So actually, it's showing you, oh my God, I realize what that does now.
Yes.
I didn't realize it's become so normal. So that's such an interesting experience to go through because then you relate differently. You go, oh my God, I didn't realize because I'm actually just piling it on and my body's just dealing with it. But when you cleaned up, you feel it. And the other thing I think, my experience, Dan, exactly what you said, it's like a spiral going up or down. Okay, because I've been on this road. The lower you go down vibration with your food and your coffees, whatever, the worse you feel, and the more you need them. So you
Yes.
go further down.
Yes.
So and the more you crave them, because the less well you feel, the more you want distraction. So and it is
Yes.
subtle and it's slow. And I've experienced this over the winter in the UK. It's slow. I just had the odd, I had the odd thing I didn't normally have, pastry in, whatever. And it's slowly, and the worse you feel, the more you need that food or that addictive thing to distract you and make you feel better. And the opposite's true. The better you feel by stopping that, the less you need them, so the higher you can go. So it's this kind of spiral either way. And it's which
Yes.
direction you're going in. And it's fascinating because it's not the further you go on that one, the less you actually think of those things and need them or addict them at all. So once I've broken that, I wasn't having to go through, oh my God, I stopped that. I didn't even want it. But the more you
Yes.
have it, the more you need it, want it. So it's this spiral either way.
That's right. Yeah, and that's so important. But it's that within that spiral, it was also important to reckon that the point that you've made about the uppers and the downers. You might get on the coffees in the morning to get pumped up, heavy food or alcohol in the evening to get back down, and that's the yo-yo. It's the dangerous spot. It's a yo-yo effect. And the interesting thing on the upward spiral is, in my experience, is this: that when I started to eat cleaner foods, my body would seek cleaner foods.
Totally. Once you've gone through that, exactly. And I've had it where I went to a cafe and I just ordered a coffee and a tiny sip. It was disgusting. But before that journey, I'd been on them every day, loving them.
Yes.
But once they cleaned out, it was like, what is this dirty kind of murky water that's kind of bitter and a bit weird? I was back in that stage when I was before I weaned myself into coffee. I was starting again with a clean slate. So exactly that, Dan. The better you are, the less you need those things and you won't crave them. But you've got to go through that period where you will be in withdrawal.
Yeah, once you recognize that link as well, it's easier to then catch yourself because, you may not be thinking, why am I going for the heavy food? Is it because we had the extra coffee in the morning? All of these things that Sam's on the, the water there with his cucumber.
Cucumber water, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Like these infusions are powerful. We can talk about that later on. But I think the bringing the relevance to the conversation around finance, these spirals, these yo-yos, the fear and greed index, which we talked about within the Navigating the Financial Reset program, we've talked about it briefly on the show as well. That really is a reflection of the emotional state of the market.
Yeah.
And when it's like, and we looked at the current fear and greed index for the crypto space. It's literally in neutral right now. Like nothing is really happening. No one is really making irrational decisions because there's no emotion in the market right now. But you look at the US stock market, the S&P, it's like slammed on on greed. Like, so now, once that goes on, it creates this hype in the market. It triggers this cortisol dopamine in our bodies. That's when we go. And this is what will happen with the next crypto bull run. It goes straight into the greed index. Our emotional intensity comes up. Then everyone's like, jittery, like over caffeinated, jumping into the market, making crazy decisions. But I wanted to bring this in because in the context of this conversation, where you've talked about that stability of thought, that kind of, there's a word I'm looking for, but I'm not coming to it. Equanimity? No. It's equilibrium, like a sense of equilibrium.
Yeah, well, I call that third way, that middle road of not being in the fear or the greed. You're just in that middle, consistent road.
You're able to see things with a clarity of thought that you're and other conditions not able to see, and that's why it's so important. Certainly for market traders, people who are doing day trading, market trading, etc., they need that clarity because they can be jolted by those emotions. But the reality is, in any decision, we make our decisions, whether we realize it or not, emotionally first, and then we rationalize it with logic.
Yeah. 100%.
So if our emotions are hard, like are shot because we're adrenally fatigued, we're like, we're up and down like yo-yos because we're getting triggered by what's going on in the world, we're not taking care of our bodies, then our capacity to make good decisions is fundamentally altered. And that's why we wanted to talk about this today, because it's not just about our health, it's about the decisions we make based upon the quality of our health.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about this today for personal reasons. And I want to say this as well, Sam, because as we've been talking about this, knowing what I know, because I've been through a different series of choices that have produced a different series of outcomes. And I've said it during that time, like if I knock something off the counter, I'll catch it. Like it's like your reaction speed goes up, your clarity of thought goes up. You're able to process more information.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
It's a paradigm shift, Dan. You're fully. I think I got what I for the first of my life felt fully hydrated
Yeah.
And it was crazy actually, because
Insane.
I was on the beach in Portugal with a good friend of mine who's going through the same journey we shared, and we actually met playing football. Really good, really talented footballer, and we used to love just knocking a football across the beach in Portugal, long range pass to each other down, and we both had quite a good level. I captained the team he was in. He's a very skillful player, but we on this journey, we started pinging these balls like to each other's feet like endlessly.
Nice.
It was this kind of spooky moment, like of high peak performance, because we were hydrated and
Yeah.
well, and not, and it wasn't that we'd been training hard or whatever, but we had an all right level, but we splay a few missed passes. We had this day, honestly, Dan, and it lives on in our memory. We still talk about. We're literally like, oh my god, and that was because I understand that our cells, once they're clean, are communicating much better. Everything's in alignment, and your powers of everything are enhanced enormously just
Yes,
from
I mean,
that. So it's
it's no
extraordinary.
surprise, therefore, the top athletes in the world, the most peak performers, the difference between the very top, the top, 5%, 1% of performers, they're the ones that pay particular attention to their diet, their
Yeah,
nutrition, their
yeah,
habits. You can
yeah.
still be a high performer without being absolutely militant on your choices, but the ones, having studied the likes of Ronaldo,
Oh, I was
that,
going to exactly who came to my mind. That there's a guy
yes,
who's
yes.
clued about what he's doing for his body all the time at hydration. That's why he is so prolific, so consistent. So, like you said, rather than be the genius who has that skill, but usually their career ends earlier or they don't have that consistency. Look at him; he's incredible because
Yeah.
he understands that side of things.
Absolutely. So now, as we're talking about this, like I can imagine some people's mind, because mine's going, it's like, well, goodness me. Like, you don't have to want to be a Ronaldo, But if you do, and metaphorically, not necessarily in football or in any endeavor or craft, then it's important to realize that the people that are able to attain things at the highest level have a different set of habits, mindsets, and practices and decisions than other people. But those capacities are available to each one of us.
Yeah,
Now, here's the tricky thing, Sam. As we've been talking, because I'm able to distinguish, because I've experienced it, the difference between what it feels like to be in that state of vibrancy and health. And by the way, as you were talking about hydration, what I learned when studying about hydration is if you're already thirsty, thirst means you've gone beyond the point of dehydration. Now, when we think of dehydration, we think about like being withered and completely at the point of absolute desperation. Actually, our hydration levels, we've gone beyond being hydrated to dehydrated. If we're thirsty, it means we've already missed the threshold. That's why it's important to drink regular water throughout the day. Like now I was drinking that water, I think I'm already thirsty. I know I'm underhydrated.
Totally agree that we're all chronically dehydrated. So again, it's this level of people saying, no, I'm healthy. I learned that we are, pretty much everybody is chronically dehydrated. Doesn't even know it.
Yes. But the reason I made that point, again, we decided today we were going to be completely unapologetic about our tangents, because last week we went on this like pinball machine of ideas, but actually all of them are interwoven and relevant.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm coming back to this is because, and other people may be experiencing this as we're watching this, because when we talk about these things, it triggers the inner knowing. It triggers the inner knowing that we are capable of more. It triggers the inner knowing that our choices are perhaps holding us back. And that can create a sense of remorse. Like right now, in real time, I'm experiencing a sense of remorse and frustration at my own decisions. Now, in one way, that's useful because we don't tend to make change into our lives until something becomes painful.
Yeah.
We get a point of leverage. Like if we get a period of ill health or we're affected by disease, then we may take different choices because we want to avoid that. But why wait till we hit that point of leverage? So a degree of remorse or pain actually can serve us if we choose to, because we can say, enough's enough. That's it. No more. I'm making a different set of decisions. But on the flip side to that, it's also unhealthy to feel a sense of remorse for what you did yesterday. Because what we do right now in this moment is what it affects our future, because we don't want to start to judge ourselves and become, beat ourselves up for the decisions we've made in the past, because then we carry that into today.
Yeah.
So use it as a trigger and a catalyst, because as we're talking right now, I had that moment of remorse. I'm like, oh man, I'm so annoyed at myself, but I'm going to use that in real time to make some different decisions to move forward, because I know what I'm capable of and I know the capacity. And if you haven't had that experience before, that's the opportunity to experience something different, which is which is so beautiful and so wonderful once you reach that stage where you can really feel vibrantly healthy. It's just so different to what I'm feeling this morning.
It's a different world, Dan, and I'm glad you said that because, you know, rather than putting pressure on yourself that you must never fall, because we're human, and that's part of it. Is like noticing that you have,
Yes.
and knowing that you've always got the choice to make changes. This moment here is always the best place to start forever. Every time you're at the moment, you can start from there. And absolutely, like, you know, your body speaks your mind, and you need to go down. You know, I know a lot of people who, you know, I've surrounded myself with people who try to stay on that high level really hard and maybe not even sustainable. You need to go on that dance, but as long as you're recognizing the dance and seeing where you are, so and knowing that you have the power to change it. So almost, you know, when you're going down a path of doing that, you know what you're doing. You go, okay, I am having a coffee because I'm tired, and that's what I'm doing, rather than becoming your norm and your habit, and then wondering why you feel sluggish. And so it's the bringing awareness to it all. And Dan, I think it's great to think about the markets, and because if you said they were the fear and greed index, yes, they are largely run by emotion, and we talk about, you know, long-term change, you know, about being everyone getting empowered and not being so spiked and being more in their own center, more grounded, more about. And if that happened over time, the markets would look different. They actually would, because the markets look like they're
Yes,
with
they would,
extreme
yeah.
peaks and troughs
Yes,
because of
yes.
humans and because of the way so many are manipulated much more or spiked into fear and greed. So an empowered person, if, you know, and this is the idea that if millions then billions of people got into their own, you know, self-empowered state, everything would start to look different without having to say, well, we've got to destroy the power system, we've got to put it down tomorrow. Actually, things would change because those systems would look different because everybody would be acting differently. So that's, again, my kind of how I view my own life, is that I can make change by improving myself, and then that will ripple out to others. But if we're all doing that over time, and again, when I say time, I don't put any limits on that. That will make change when it changes. But that would even up in the markets. The markets would not be as crazy as they are if everybody was grounded and centered, Dan. So if you can get there, you know, it'd be great if everyone get there, but you can't rely on what other people are doing. You can only control yourself. So if you can get there, you can start to act grounded within it. And from the market point of view, rather than being pulled around by the markets, you just see what they're doing, you understand what they're doing and why, and you take what the market gives you. If the market's giving you great prices of undersold assets, take that. That's a gift. I'll have that. If it's giving you overpriced assets that people really want to buy them off you at a high price, I'll take that. Do you see what I mean? There's a real difference. You're still there, and you're taking what the market gives you, rather than being glued to the market and your emotions being moved with it. That's a whole different modality to be in.
Well, I think the other piece, and you're absolutely right, and the other important piece to recognise within this is that the system, quote unquote, the established order, benefits from the suppression and sedation of the masses.
Yeah,
So we
100%.
have to recognise that, because in this highly this highly suppressed state, we buy the sugary foods, we consume, and actually consumption itself is a drug, like an addiction. It's a way. We buy things to meet an emotional need that ultimately.
Dan, I thought I've been on a long-term, journey down the rabbit holes, and as we all know, so deep, so much going on, so much mind-blowing stuff. What was interesting to me when I went on my food journey, I almost felt like this is the most powerful control tool of them all. We talked about it. It really hit home to me that how much that attachment, that addiction to these foods, and is actually almost, because I knew how low they made people vibrate, and how much they clouded thinking, and how much you couldn't get into really clear states and empowered states on the foods, that I thought, wow, this is actually the most incredible control structure. And we see the proliferation of worse and worse food habits. And I saw it down. I've talked about different cultures that are perhaps more behind the West, is where you can get better food still.
Yeah.
I just talk about France because I lived in France for 20 years. When I moved there, they were definitely further behind the kind of junk food, stuff in the UK. And I watched them catch up. I watched this globalization of the degradation of food stuff, because when I first went to France, it was hard to buy all the different crisps in the supermarket. There weren't a lot of the kind of snacks. It was much more traditional, which is traditional bakers, butchers, much less stuff in the supermarket. And I've seen that all these products flowed in from around the world. Everyone wants them. And now I have to go further afield. I go to Morocco, or go to, so it's interesting to see that degradation and it lowers the standards everywhere, and it does have a huge effect on the population. No question.
I've watched numerous food documentaries that have shown that, areas of the world that didn't previously have obesity, diabetes, and all these other diseases that weren't native to the population all emerged when Western corporations landed on the shores.
Incredible. Dan, I've got one little nugget because it's such a powerful one. The island of Tuvalu, okay, it's a tiny island. It got mega rich because when the internet exploded, what's the technical term for, the is it the domains, but the .co.uk or the .fr branch, they were, allocated different countries. Tuvalu got allocated .tv, right? And all these corporations thought, we want that. That's an incredible, right?
Yes.
So Tuvalu, this tiny little island nation, I think is in the South Pacific, correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, tiny island, suddenly, sold the rights to their domain they'd been given, but, were absolutely made, multi-millionaires overnight, this tiny island. And within 5 years, they had a great culture, a very healthy race within 5 years, because they started just importing all the sugary products they never had, stopping cargo ships around the island. They all bought, this is hilarious, Dan. I mean, it's hilarious and it's terribly sad. They all bought luxury cars. They didn't have a road, but they bought all these luxury cars before they'd ridden the road. And it's literally got to the point where, it's awful, but it's a caricature of the situation where it was like a permanent traffic jam. It didn't go anywhere because the island was so small with these luxury cars on it. Everybody started getting diabetes. Obesity went off the scale, ill health. They had so much rubbish because suddenly they were buying all this imported food with packaging. I mean, they completely destroyed this island paradise in a short number of years from an influx of wealth that they didn't need before, but suddenly they had. And all the Western food and the products come in. So it was a visceral example of what you're saying on steroids. And it just it shows the degradation that's possible by bringing in all that stuff. So terribly sad story, but look it up. It's fascinating as an example.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's just, but also again, here's the paradigm that's important, is that it's very then easy to blame the big corporations. And I'm not saying they're not culpable or responsible. That's not what I'm saying, that they didn't play a role. But any individual can make the choice to not, in the same way that I'm now making the choice to not be consuming the alcohol. Alcohol. It's not alcohol, trust me.
It's got to the stage.
It's not Irish coffee. Yeah, 10 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. No, this is hashtag coffee.
You've read the study that Irish coffee is what you really need to be credited this morning, yeah.
Yeah, the red hair, I'm not Irish. I might have some heritage, we don't know. But the point is, we have the capacity to make decisions. And the reality, as we've talked about, it's easier to make those decisions when we're in a healthy state, because the reality is we are bombarded by messaging, narratives, advertising, all of which is trying to persuade us and influence us every single day to make those unhealthy choices.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to ourselves, and that's the key. That to me is the key, and recognizing big industry serves no one but itself. Yeah. And
the drug pushers are going to push drugs, but it's whether you buy them.
Exactly.
And we'll always come back to the line of, I say, the manipulators aren't going to stop existing, the tricksters aren't going to stop existing. What can we do, though? We can stop ourselves being tricked, manipulated, or being a consumer of their drugs. And I want to make this point about coffee because people might not realize, if you are going to drink coffee, and there is a huge difference between good quality coffee, and I won't name them all, but the big global chains, big corporations. The other reason it's so problematic is not just the caffeine. And I learned this on my journey, that because they're using poor quality beans that have been stored for a long time, you've got this issue of mycotoxins, which essentially are molds on foods. So a lot of stored grains, but coffee is stored for a long time. And therefore, a lot of the jitteriness and the kind of shakiness people are getting is not even the caffeine in those coffees, it is the molds.
That's why decaf can still produce the jitters.
Which is why I was going to say that, Dan. So if you have a decaf from one of these big unnamed, you can guess who they are, chains, the decaf will probably not be great because they use even worse beans for the decaf. But of course, as you know, there are small suppliers, and I've got a really great local coffee shop where there are amazing decafs using high quality beans, where they're doing water filtering processes with distilled water. So there are better, and again, the better quality and the more independent, you're going to get a better experience, and you're actually dealing with the caffeine situation rather than actually caffeine mixed with the jitteriness that's coming from poor quality produce. So again, if you are going to consume these things, again, look at the local quality produce, things you can track and understand. And so same with my cucumber water, it's an organic cucumber grown from, somebody I know nearby, because there's a huge issue with, water, high water content things like watermelons and cucumbers that take up a huge number of toxin and pesticides. So again, that's all about decentralization at the same time, isn't it, Dan?
Decentralization, yes,
it ties into
that's
it.
always the
Whether
answer.
it's coffee or cucumbers, yeah, and where you're coming from. So absolutely, it's huge, and like I said, it's pulling ourselves out of that trap. The more we're in it, the harder it is to get out of it. Like any addiction, and that spiral can go down, and it can be subtle. We're not talking about serious drug addiction, but actually, in terms of our performance and our creativity and empowerment, it does have an effect, no question, on us, and we are addicts.
Yes, and there's a couple of things I want to draw out here, because the cycles point you mentioned earlier, the upward and downward cycle. Now, it's easy to say that the wealth flowed into the small island and then it became corrupted. Wealth can also have the opposite effect. So wealth can give us the capacity to make choices that we may not otherwise be able to make. But there's two strands to this I want to explore, because on one hand, the difficulty is what you're mentioning often, sadly, because of the kind of mass production of these bigger companies. They're able to produce things because of the poor quality, but because of the mass produced nature, they do it. The cost base is much smaller at scale. So that's why people say that the unhealthy bit is cheaper, and it generally is. Now, there's one side of the story of that which is true, but there's the other side to that, which is it is also possible to eat and drink healthily on a low budget. A couple of years back, my old podcast, the Unstoppable podcast, which actually was all about peak performance and high performance, and the entire podcast was about that. So every week, I felt accountable to the story. So I'm glad we're talking about this today. But we did a challenge with our community members where the goal was to eat as cleanly as possible for inexpensively as possible. And people's weekly shop were coming in astronomically low. And it was just fascinating to see the creativity when you come back to abundance. And that's why people are building like community food gardens now. And there's all these great things happening, localization, decentralization, that gives access to those things. But again, coming back to the point around wealth, our ability to gather wealth and accumulate wealth does also give us greater choices.
Yep.
Some of the healthiest people I know are also the wealthiest people I know.
Yep.
But some of the unhealthiest people I know are also some of the wealthiest people I know. It comes with the same principle of how we choose to live our lives, and the same is true of wealth. People say money is evil. Well, no, it's like technology. It's neutral until it's in the hands of the user.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, like if I was to really get nuanced, you could say like if you build a gun, like really where does the harm come? Like, what's the intent in its production? And the same with Facebook. It's built to sell advertising ultimately, so there is intention sometimes built into the device. But again, it still comes down to how we use it. And the same is true with our decisions when it comes to our wealth. Money itself is a tool, and we can use it for positive intent or negative intent, empowering intent or disempowering intent, which is why some people who are super wealthy are also super healthy. It's also why some people are super wealthy are super unhealthy. And I think that's the important thing. But having the money, and my friend used to joke, he used to say, well, at least having money, I can turn up to my problems in style, he would say.
Yeah. But what's the other commodity that you get? The other commodity that wealthy people are getting off, and you could argue it's the most valuable commodity in terms of our life experience, is time.
Yes.
Okay. What would a trillionaire on his deathbed or a multi-billionaire on his deathbed would give it all away for more time, potentially. So, and particularly if you've got healing to do, and a lot of us have come from a state where, very toxic world we're living in, that it's not just we want to make better choices, we might have some healing to do, and we need some time. And if we and that's also what wealth can bring us is actually more options, more time to invest in our own health and recovery from whatever we've gone through. And again, that's for yourself and for others, to help people and build structures that over the longer term nurture that side of things. That's what I'm passionate about, is that, is the ways to be able to do that, to support these things, like you said, Dan, of more healthy eating. Well, maybe that needs financing more land or more growing projects or more education. And so all those things, exactly as you said, the money coming into that island didn't have to go that way. But of course, very media manipulated by what's shiny, as I discussed when I saw in Morocco. I saw the real old style, real healthy, and I saw that people with more wealth being attracted to the shiny big brands with lower standards. And that's again. But when you bring awareness and consciousness, like a lot of people, be watching this today, we're already halfway out of that trap anyway. We know where, we're not blind to that not being a positive move, whereas, a lot of people potentially are a lot more blind to that. So you're absolutely right. Where you go with that, there's incredible stuff you can do with that wealth, and put it to good use for yourself, your family, your community, and the greater, communities around you.
That's so important. That's so important. I was joking about, my friends joke about turning up to your problems in style, but you can also turn up to your problems with greater energy and health and vibrancy, with greater health, so that's, and greater wealth can help us to achieve that. And your important point there as well is, if, in the first instance, we're looking obviously to provide for ourselves and our families, but having greater capacity enables us to start to support things beyond ourselves. And I think that's why a lot of people go into business is or look to expand their wealth so they can support the projects that they care about. Quite frankly, if I had the abundance right now to support a lot of the initiatives that I'm coming across through this podcast and through the great work that's happening out there, I would love to be able to provide financial resources to support those, because often that's the thing that's lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And we live in a real world where, resources and money's involved in it. So I think that's where, people oversimplify that. I'm just looking at practically rather. So absolutely the intention and, the thinking positively, but also the practicalities that do exist.
Yes.
And that's where we are. So I'm trying to marry those two together and be practical about things as well.
Absolutely.
As well as think positively.
Your other point around the time resource, again, if we have greater financial abundance, even if I didn't have the abundance to provide, the types of resources that I'd like to these projects, I may be able to offer my time if I had the right wealth. So I think this is, again, it all comes connected. And the critical variable, I think, as you've touched upon, is the awareness and the consciousness that it comes with. And again, those two things, our awareness and our consciousness, can be disrupted by these ill health, poor habits. Our ability to come back to consciousness and our conscious awareness is influenced by our ability to make better choices. So it can become a virtuous circle, or it can become a disruptive circle. And it comes down to us to break that pattern, really. It's interrupting the pattern. This conversation to me has interrupted my pattern, radically interrupted it. It's brought me back to knowing what's possible. It's brought me literally face to face with my habits that are no longer serving me. And as a result, I'm coming to a place of new decisions. And for me, we've made the commitment that we want to kind of close these conversations with practical things that people can do. My offering to you today, and I'm making the commitment today, in the next 2 weeks in the build up to Camp Out, maybe longer, but in the next 2 weeks at least, it's about setting realistic, achievable goals. I'm gonna abstain from caffeine, the habit of caffeine. If I need to use it or would like to use it, not need, if I'd like to use it for intentional purposes, for something creative with a quality choice, that's also possible. But the habitual usage of caffeine, I'm going to stop for the next 2 weeks.
The grabbing a coffee. I mean, we even talk about that. That is almost the messaging, is it? Grab a coffee.
Grab a coffee.
And therefore, you're not even enjoying it. So I'm like you, Dan. I still enjoy the ritual, and I'd say, but luckily I do have a good person locally where I get a really good decaf, and I'll sit and really enjoy that. And it is a ritual, and it is a comfort at some level, but it's a real different thing from just grabbing another coffee, another one, and getting it on the go.
Well, it's interesting, that ritual point, and actually the ritual point is important. I know people who have given up smoking, for instance, and they've taken up meditation, because what actually happens when people smoke cigarettes, it's the only time in the day they're breathing deeply. So meditation or breath work is a replacement. So, for your ability to breathe, just take conscious breath. That's all it is as part of that replacement. Because often when we're giving up one habit, there is evidence to suggest that we don't ever break habits, we replace them. So in one sense, if I let go of this, then I need to be doing something like you're doing and having the cucumber water. It needs to be replaced by a new habit. So my offering to our audience today, to you, is what's the one habit you want to break or disrupt, and what can you replace that? What's a disempowering habit that you currently have in your life that you would like to replace, and what's an empowering habit that you could interchange it for today? How can you make that shift today? That's my offering to you today.
Yeah, totally, Dan. I'm totally behind that. It's improve. I always talk about it's improving your situation. Some people go, I can't cope with giving all that up. Just improve it. Same as we talked about in your financial situation. We talk about it a lot in the course of the financial reset of how do we improve it. You haven't got to go straight to the end goal. You don't even know what the end goal is, but you just improving it time by time, and that consistency is so much more powerful than almost falling into a boom bust of going, I'm going to give up everything tomorrow. Well, that's not sustainable. Then I'll crash again. But actually, with consistency, the results will come. And I want to leave people with a few different alternatives. As my gift is that the dandelion coffee is amazing, because roasted dandelion root is actually amazing for your liver. And I got this down. It is linked to the lockdown, because in the French lockdown, which was really harsh, especially you meant to have papers to leave the house. And I've talked about it. There were roadblocks to the local bakery. I lived in the mountains at the time in France. But actually, I'd got back into the coffees because there's a lovely little ritual in the old cafe before, in the bottom of the mountain near the cable car. So I'd got back into that coffee ritual after a summer of being off them. And I looked into dandelion coffee, and I went and wild harvested, because it was dandelion season in March, April in the Alps. And so I actually went around, harvested them, cut them up, dried them, roasted them, and made coffees out of it. And it has that kind of nutty coffee, roasted flavour. It's not the same, but obviously if you want it sweetened, it can work a little bit with a bit of raw honey in there. But delicious, and also it's a liver cleanse. Dandelion's incredibly powerful. So actually you've got that kind of feeling of that rich, dark drink, but it's actually a cleanse. And it can be quite powerful. So go gently and see how you feel with it. And the other thing is, I'm on.
So before you move on, what form does it come in? So it usually there's a health store up the road. I'm going to go and visit. They must have it.
You won't find it everywhere, but I did find it recently in one. So my local one didn't have it, but you can find it online obviously as well. But it comes in kind of, it's roasted little bits of root, which you can then blend up if you need, or just add water. But ideally, you can, if you've got a coffee grinder, you put that in the grinder. I've got a NutriBullet, blast it in there, and then use it as you would in one of those coffee percolator, and you make a coffee and give it a go. And then the other one that's really powerful, because it's actually addressing the adrenal fatigue, which we're all suffering from, I'd argue, particularly in the West with all the media and everything we've been through, is licorice root tea. And you were saying, Dan, that you quite like licorice before I'd even mentioned this. Licorice root tea is actually supporting the adrenals, which are the master glands. So again, if licorice speaks to you, it's quite a rich flavour. Try licorice root tea, which again, you'll find either online or in your health food shop. So those are my two offerings of, finding drinks in the morning that you really enjoy. And that's the thing, Dan. I know it. I've made the shift now. And I was fully in the coffees for months this winter, loads. Now I'm having something I do enjoy, and I know it's doing me good. And so even the placebo effect, I feel good about myself. I feel good about my choices. Things feel different already. So those are my sort of my gifts of suggestions, that you might like to try.
Well, if you're on the same page as me, and your one simple change is to substitute coffee, you've got two great examples there. Sam, I also want to illustrate in real time how underperforming I am right now. My brain has already forgotten what the first one was. Literally, it was 2 minutes ago. Dandelion coffee. And dandelion coffee and licorice root.
And if the dandelion coffee is too not to speak to you, then a sort of simple one, a chicory coffee.
Oh yes, I've tried chicory.
Chicory and barley ones, but dandelion. I'd very dandelion because it's got amazing liver detox, and our livers are overworked by all these stimulants. So liver detox is dandelion.
Amazing. So there we have it. As I mentioned, we often it's easier to replace a habit than break it. So if you're considering also giving up your habitual coffee need, you've got two replacements there. But whatever it is for you, consider what's your one simple change. What habitual change could you make today to come back into awareness, into consciousness and health? And how can you apply that to your daily decision making? Sam, as always, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think such an important one that's really vital when it comes to our overall wealth, because if we think about prosperity as every facet of our life and the quality of our lives, the wealth and health of our relationships with others and ourselves and the world around us, it's the possibilities become infinite when we are able to come into that space of clarity of thought that comes from that vital health habit. So let us know in the comments what you thought of today's episode. Also, do type what's the one simple change you're going to make so you can share that with others. It'd be wonderful to see that. And over the next couple of weeks, if you want to join me on the replacement of coffee. Let's swap notes on how that goes. You'll hear my progress update on our next episode. So Sam, as always, to let people know about other things that we've got going on, we've just had our monthly crypto cafe session. We meet twice a month within the Navigating the Financial Reset program to look at the wider economic picture. In our next session, we've just booked a special guest. We've got Francis Hunt, who's the founder of Market Sniper. We're really excited to have him with us, looking at the big picture of all of the markets, not just crypto, looking across bonds, looking across property, stocks, and various different asset classes. That will be coming up next month. And of course, if you're new to digital assets, we haven't talked about crypto or digital assets today. I mean, I've just been in some heated discussions on my timeline based upon people's perceptions of crypto. But if you're open-minded and you want to kind of know the good, the bad, and the ugly, then the Navigating the Digital Assets course we put together is a really great starting point. It can give you a really solid grounding, fundamental grounding. And the fundamentals are key, whether we're talking about health or we're talking about wealth, learning the fundamentals, learning the good, the bad, and the ugly, learning the different options and choices. It's all a process of education. And Sam made such a critical point, is that once, changing one healthy habit is like a gateway drug to other healthy habits. And the same, but we can't become overwhelmed by the whole picture, because that's what happened to me when I started learning about health habits, is I wanted to know everything about healthy living. And I'm not saying it was unhealthy, that level of learning, but it can stifle us. It can stop us from actually taking action. So,
well, it's like perfectionism again, isn't it?
Yes,
it can actually be a trap. So your desire to learn, great, but the desire to get it perfect can also stop you from just making small improvements and not looking for the absolute panacea of perfection, but you're on the journey.
Absolutely.
You're actually on that journey. And that's what we're doing with the program, the support program, and get the courses, looking at them holistically and looking how can we improve, use the tools, know one, and find what resonates with you. Because exactly, that's the most important part of that health journey, is that you are the driver of it, and also you are the person who can say, yeah, that worked for me, that improved me. No one else can say that for you. You have to go and find that out for yourself, whether it's, learning about the different finances and different options you've got there, or whether it's health, same thing. So improving yourself and on that journey and becoming captains of our own ship, Dan, because we've got to navigate what's coming. The world's not going to stop and all get calm for us. We need to be the captain of our own ship so we can navigate and plot our own course, because there's plenty of courses being plotted for you. That's the role of those people. They want to plot courses that you just funnel into. But if we can all learn to be captains of our own ship, then we can navigate and plot our own course. And that's what excites me.
Absolutely. Well, I accept that call, Sam. Thank you so much for this conversation today.
Thanks,
if
mate.
You're interested in finding about the different options that we've just shared with you there, just go to weareelevate.org/NFR. You'll find the details, /reset. So you've got both options there. www.weareelevate.org/reset. You'll see both of the programs we've talked about. And at the core of what we do is education and empowerment, so that you can make informed choices and therefore take action, because action is what makes the change. Action is what helps us to influence our own lives and the world around us. And the only thing that we are in direct control of is our own decisions, the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. We can influence an awful lot more when we're in a state of empowered, awakened, conscious state. And hopefully today's episode has inspired you to make some positive habitual changes in your own life so that you too can be part of the change. Thanks again, Sam. What a great episode.
Cheers, Dan.